apyayantu mamangani vak pranashchakshu shrotramatho balamindriyani cha sarvani sarvam brahma upanishadam maham brahma nirakuryam mama brahma nirakarot anirakaranam astvanirakaranam me astu tadatmani nirate upanishatsu dharmaste mayi santu te mayi santu. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. So we can now read verse 1.2 because we just finished verse 1.2. And okay, who would like to read verse 1.2?
It is indeed the self that is the ear of the ear, the mind of the mind, the speech of the speech, the breath of the breath, and the eye of the eye. Those discriminative people who know the self, freeing themselves from this world, being free by living, are no more subject to death after leaving the body.
Lovely read. And now verse 1.3 we discuss, and then we can read after we discuss it. So, okay. So, na tatra chakshuhu gachati, na vak gachati, na manaha, na vidmaha, na vijanimaha, yatha etad, anushishyad, anya deva, tad viditad, athaha, aviditad, adhi iti shushruma, purve sham ye nastad, vyachachakshire. So, we'll just take this tatra, chakshuhu, gachati. So chakshuhu is eyes. So in other words, the eyes do not go there. In other words, Brahman, awareness is not an object of your vision. It's not something that you can see. It is, if it were to be an object to your eye, then you would have to describe it, just like you're describing this. Or sometimes in meditation, we would think that I'm supposed to see something, right? Some divine vision, some light, something kind of like here in the third eye, the Ajna chakra. And I'm supposed to, and when I see that, I have come in touch with God, right? This is kind of out there. We've heard this before. So it says here, the reality is not something that you can see specifically. It's not time bound to your vision, to your eyes, to your sense of sight, because it is not without any form. Awareness has no form. It is formless. Therefore, there is no logic trying to grasp or see that which is not seeable, which is beyond sight, and yet is the truth of all objects. Okay? And then it says, na vak gachati. In other words, speech does not go there. So, in other words, words cannot reach awareness. So there's nothing that someone can say, or some special mantra, that if you say Om Namah Shivaya, Om Namah Shivaya, Om Namah Shivaya times 100,000 times, which is actually a prescription, you will suddenly have the reality come to you magically, because there is nothing you can say to describe it. Now you say, well, if there's nothing you can say to describe it, why are you teaching this, Andre? Why are we all teaching this? This is because there is a method by which you use limited words to convey the limitless reality. In other words, how can a limited word convey the limitless reality? How is this possible? The contradiction is there. And the way to understand that is to know that every word that you say can have a literal meaning, and a deeper implied meaning. The literal meaning is vachyartha, and the deeper meaning, the meaning that the teacher uses, that means what you see on the page is the literal meaning. The teacher uses the deeper meaning. So this is why if you say, oh, why don't I just kind of convert this word for word in Sanskrit and I'll get the truth. That is the most confusing way to get the truth, because you're looking at merely dictionary terms. So this is why sometimes the student will ask, yeah, but Andre, this is not what the dictionary says about sopadika. Why are you using something different? Because the teacher uses always the implied meaning. The one who's studying by themselves uses the literal meaning. So vachyartha is literal. So for example, if I say to you, hey, bring me water, please. What are you going to do? Bring me a big blob of water, right? What are you going to do? In other words, I told you the literal meaning, but what your understanding is that you have to fill in one extra word which I was not mentioning, and you filled in glass, and therefore you made sense of that statement. So vachyartha is literal, and lakshyartha is deeper. Deeper meaning which the teacher uses. Which is why self-study is fine. But self-study has the danger of falling for the literal meaning. So if you say something like awareness is beyond speech, you say, well, I'm not going to listen to any teacher because they're all using speech to describe this reality. So I'm never going to listen. This is the danger of not finding a teacher who can explain the deeper meaning of the words. So the deeper meaning wants to say what I don't mean. So what the scriptures say is one thing, but the deeper meaning adds one extra component is what I don't actually mean, because the mind always wants to fill in and say, this is what you mean. But then the deeper meaning, the lakshyartha, says, here's what I don't mean. So we have to find those don't means. Otherwise, your mind will misinterpret the teaching. So how is this done? Well, how do we describe this reality that we've been talking about? The rishis have used 3 accurate words to accurately describe this reality. And if you look at these 3 words literally, then the whole thing will go wrong. For example, the first word they say is this reality is sat, which means existence. So if you look at the literal meaning of sat, what is your understanding of that which is existent? Like something is existent. Literally, something is existent. Just like normal person says, the piano is existent. In other words, it's always isolated to objects within time and space. So this is the vachyartha, the literal meaning. The implied meaning is that from which objects come from. The existence, the content that fills up all objects, making them what they are. That from which time, space, and objects all come out of. In other words, when it comes to sat, you took away the limitation, or you took away the meaning of, quote, within time and space. And how did that happen? Well, we just mentioned it. We say, what I don't mean by existence, this reality being existence, is I don't mean that this reality is within time, space. What I do mean is that this reality, which is existence, is the truth of time, space, and therefore everything else that comes out of time and space. When it comes to chit, which we used the word before at the start of the teaching, which means awareness. What does awareness traditionally mean, or consciousness? How ordinary people use, I'm aware of the fact that I was late. Yeah, mental image. And scientists will, or even neurologists, many of them, there are many books that I'm yet to read, but I've seen some of them, where they will write whole books. And the discussion is about trying to find consciousness within the physical brain. And they will have scientific data, research, quote, evidence to show that consciousness is within the brain. And it's very convincing. And the amount of stars that that book has on Amazon, 5 out of 5. 5-star reviews. Because who's reading that book? The ones who are already buying into or coming from the idea that consciousness is a product of the brain. So the literal, the Vachyartha meaning of chit, awareness, is aliveness, sentiency. But the implied meaning of consciousness is, what have we learned so far about what consciousness is or awareness? It's not intelligence. There is a Satyamitra relationship. What else is consciousness? Sorry? It's not changing? Super. So that which is sadharana. It is common. What else have we learned about consciousness during this course? It's excellent. So it survives all of the changes. What else have we learned about consciousness? It is the source of everything. Super. No attributes. It is a subject. It's the light in which everything is known. The witness of all changes. Okay? Therefore, what we just asked here was, what was the lakshyartha? What was the implied, the deeper meaning of chit, awareness? And you have all very rightly answered that very well. So, well done. So, and then, what else is this reality? It is anantam. Anantam, so sat, it is existence, it is chit, it is awareness. And what kind of existence and awareness is it? That's your natural question you're going to ask. Is it time-bound? No, it is anantam, existence and awareness, which means it is limitless. Now, how do you look at yourself when he talks about this reality? Well, you think that I, Atma, am just one of the manifestations. I am, right, sort of limited. This is how you start out. This is, your literal understanding. Wow, this reality that they're talking about, I am just yet to, I'm yet to get in touch with it. But the deeper meaning is, the very person who's trying to get in touch with it is it. Only has to discover it, that it's already true right now through the pramana. Therefore, Sat Chit, and what kind of a Sat Chit? It is limitless. It is without a second. There's only one. That means there's no two existence awarenesses competing with each other. One existence is better than the other existence. One awareness is more evolved than another awareness. There is only one existence from which time and space comes and which fills the content of all objects. And there is only one awareness in whose presence all of the objects that are filled with existence are illumined, are revealed, are recognized in the presence of that awareness. So understand this, it's not two different things here. It's not like awareness is one thing and existence is one thing. It's just describing, helping you understand what is existence. What is awareness? Well, awareness is something that by the very virtue, think about it logically, by the very virtue of revealing, of in the presence of whom something is revealed, the very virtue of that recognizer, revealer, is existent. It's not sort of mysterious. Just to recognize something means that which recognizes exists. Therefore, the nature of it is existence and awareness. What kind of awareness is it? It's an existent awareness. What kind of an existence is it? It's an awareful existence. In other words, whatever shows up in existence is awared by what? By existence awareness. Whatever existence manifests as, it is existent and it is revealed by awareness, which is existence. So when existence shows as an object, that object is awared by that existence. Therefore, this existence awareness is without a second. It is the content of the universe. And not only is it the content of the universe, it is the revealer in whose presence objects are coming and going. What kind of objects? Existent objects. Therefore, what I want to show is that Vedanta uses a methodology using limited words to convey a limitless meaning. That's how the tradition works, by using the deeper meanings of words rather than the literal meaning of words, which is why someone can study this for 40 years or kind of look at it from an academic standpoint. They will never, ever, ever get it. You can only get the true meaning from the Guru-Shishya tradition. That is just how it works. It's not just here. It's also the same thing in science. In physics class, you can say, oh, I understood E equals mc squared. You know, you can convert, you can extract energy out of matter. You can extract a lot of energy out of matter, which is how we made, atomic bombs. Yeah, I understood. And you can also convert matter back into energy. What's the big deal? I've understood. Really? Scientists took over 10 years to discover the implied meaning behind E equals mc squared. And there's an individual who goes, yeah, energy goes into matter and matter can be converted into energy. I've understood. Why is it that quick? Because of Vachyartha, because of the literal meaning. So the implied meaning always takes time and relationship. Vachyartha is a quick fix, but quick fix doesn't answer anything. It just satisfies you temporarily. Na manaha. So it cannot be known by the mind. Now this is very interesting. This is where a lot of confusion is going to come. Oh, it cannot be known by the mind, really? Huh. So look at this. Where does ignorance happen? Where is ignorance stored? In your foot? Where? In the mind. There's only one place where ignorance is prevalent. It's in the mind. So where does knowledge have to take place then? In the very same place where ignorance is. So now what happens is you need the mind to know Brahman. And yet it says Brahman is beyond the mind. So what happens now is if the teacher says, you can't know Brahman with the mind, then if the teacher doesn't follow up with what they mean, the student will say then next time, oh, this is all intellectual. Brahman cannot be known through the mind because I heard that. And there is a truth to that. So how do you resolve this? Brahman cannot be known by the mind, and yet the only way to understand Brahman is through the mind. Oh no. You see, there is some truth to this because the mind is so accustomed to converting everything into an object. And therefore the teacher will naturally say, Brahman is not something for the mind. So there is a truth to that. But if the teacher just walks away or doesn't follow up, then the student will, probably forevermore, for the rest of his life, keep on discarding anything which is pramana, which involves a lot of usage of the mind. Therefore, to understand this, what we have to do is go through another prakriya to reconcile this contradiction. How? So when you learn anything, what happens is there's an object that is outside of your mind, somewhere. For example, there is some tent over there, and we don't know. So what we all have to do is we have to move our bodies and put our eyes and see that tent. And when the eye sees that tent, the image of that tent will enter into your mind. And what's going to happen is, assuming how much of that tent you've looked all around, all angles, that much you will have knowledge about that tent. In other words, if you only see half of a tent, you will say, yeah, I've seen the tent, but have you really seen the tent? Not really, because you need to walk all around, and then if I ask you this question, have you seen the tent? You will say, yes, I've seen the tent. But this time, what you really mean is I saw 100% of the tent, but first time you meant I only saw 50% of the tent. So in other words, the more I expose my mind to something, the more it recreates the external image of an object and represents it in the mind. And the more details it adds onto that image, the more it is keeping with what is presented to me, whether it is an object or whether it is a lecture. Now, with an object like a tent, it's very simple, because I just show you tent from all angles, done. But when it comes to a subtle topic, like explaining E equals mc squared, then what happens is there's a lot of nuances. And nuances are not so easily capturable like a tent, which is why we have tests in schools. Because what the teacher wants to discover is how much has the mind of the student captured and how much is it keeping with the information that was conveyed to the student. The degree to how much the mind has understood a reality is a degree to how much the mind has captured what was presented to it at the time of the class. Which is why, again, when we ask questions, you're like, oh, I thought this was clearly explained, but when I'm asked a question, you're shaken up a little bit. You're like, can I really answer this? So this is meant to test and see how much what I have said has represented accurately in your mind. Because whenever we doubt ourselves, whenever there is a lack of completion of what was taught, then when a question is asked, then what happens is it transfers or converts into a doubt. So the more doubts regarding a certain question that's being asked, the more doubts and hesitance and hesitation to answer, the more likely that image, that information that was conveyed by the teacher was not complete, or is not complete, was not complete because teacher has done a good job, but has not been completely transferred into your mind. Even though you thought it was all clear at the time of receptivity. And yet, when the question comes, because if I ask you, what is your name? Like that. Because the whole image of your name is well sculpted in your mind. No problems there. But when I ask you, what is Sopadika Tyasa? And what is the difference between Sopadika and Nirupadika? You're like, like that, okay? So understand this is not about kind of putting anyone down. It's just how the nature of the mind works. Sometimes when I was preparing for this, I was like, how much do I really understand? So what I do sometimes is I just put this inside, it's great things today with AI. You can just put a book inside AI and you can say generate 50 questions based on this text. And it generates 50 questions and I'm like, whoa. The question's been asked and I'm already taken back. So it's a beautiful way to demonstrate how well you have captured by asking yourself questions, and then you will see how accurate and how well constructed that image is keeping with what was intended to be communicated through the texts, through the Upanishads. And therefore, when it comes to knowledge taking place of the conveyed idea, conveyed information, what happens is, in Sanskrit we call this vritti jnanam has taken place. Vritti jnanam. How many T's? 2 T's, right? Vritti jnanam. By the way, some people say this jnanam, it's actually jnanam, but because Hindi speakers it's so prevalent, they will say jnanam, so that's why I also say jnanam. But it's actually jnanam, which is very rare to be said nowadays. So vritti jnanam. So vritti jnanam is when the external object whether it is a gross object or a subtle object like knowledge in the Upanishads, has been accurately represented in the mind of the listener, and that representation is called vritti jnanam. Vritti means thought, jnanam means knowledge. That means knowledge in the form of a mental image, a mental mode is now accurately representing the information that is being conveyed. Now, this vritti jnanam has two sub-operations. Sub-operations means it's further understood by understanding two sub-operations. Vritti vyapti means result. And phala vyapti. Why am I doing this now? Because what was the original question? How do you reconcile that Brahman cannot be known through the mind, and yet mind is the only way by which you can know Brahman? So phala vyapti. Okay, so what is vritti vyapti? So this means when I see a rose, if I show you a rose, then that rose, I'm probably not on camera now because it cuts me here and sit down. So this means when I show you a rose, then right, what happens is your mind captures that rose and it represents it inside your mind. Okay? Therefore, rose image is created. Such as, okay, so right now, look at this. Okay, you ready? Boom. Okay, so now two things took place when I, hold on, it's too unstable. Okay, so 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, in that moment, when this happened, watch. Okay, two things happened so quickly you missed it. It just happened so fast. What happened first? Vritti vyapti has obtained. That means the image in your mind has obtained. And because the image has obtained, what happened then is phala vyapti. Ignorance of this, which was not there just a moment ago, has been removed. So two things are happening. Image created, ignorance removed. Okay? Vritti vyapti, the image has been captured in your mind, and because it's captured in your mind, it has removed ignorance of ball. When it comes to knowledge of Atma, knowledge of who you are, knowledge of Brahman, knowledge of awareness, these are all synonymous words, by the way, all mean consciousness. Brahman, consciousness, awareness, Atma, I am, Swataha Siddha, Swayam Prakasha. These are all words that we use so far in this course to convey awareness. Chit also. Okay? So, when it comes to understanding who you are, does vritti vyapti happen? Remember, vritti vyapti is an image of something. Yes. No, I hope you said no. I heard no. So, I'll make this a little bit more clear. When it comes to knowing who you are, there's a special kind of Sanskrit word that we use, and then we explain it, called akanda akara vritti. Akanda, so in other words, what is akanda akara vritti? When moksha takes place, what specifically is moksha? What happens in the mind when moksha takes place? This means it is a mental mode which doesn't have an image, because Atma is not an image. You cannot represent consciousness in your mind because it is not an object available. So what akanda akara means, it's a thought which has no division. It's a formless thought. Huh? A formless thought? What do you mean by that? In other words, it is not vritti vyapti because vritti has a form. It only is phala vyapti because phala vyapti removes forms. In other words, what kind of forms does phala vyapti remove? What's removed? An idea. And what is an idea? an idea is vritti-vyapti. In other words, I had an idea once upon a time during the stage of ignorance that Atma was an object. So once upon a time, I had an idea that Atma was like this, some sound, some object, which is a form, isn't it? An idea is a form. So when moksha takes place, what you do, you don't add a new image, just like with everything else. You remove images. And in respect to removing ideas and images, it is phala vyapti, because you remove the idea that you are something that is out there and it is yet to be gained in the future, that the truth is not here, it is tomorrow. Moksha is for those Buddhas, therefore Ramana Maharishis. For me, nobody. In other words, all of these notions are removed. Now, what about until moksha takes place? Everything from day one, since beginningless time, it was all vritti-vyapti, phala-vyapti. Vritti-vyapti, phala-vyapti. As I said, vritti-vyapti and phala-vyapti. In other words, all that you were doing until moksha was creating images that are representing values, how to live, how to be dharmic, how to love, how to communicate, how to do what is to be done. These are all mental vrittis. Vritti doesn't just mean thought, by the way. It also means mental mode. That means all that was happening was mental modes were being changed in your mind. Only when you understand who you are, it is no longer an image, it is a removal of a mental mode which made it so that you thought Atma was an image. That mode is removed. For example, when would this take place? They're enlightened, I'm just nobody. This is an idea right now that you're talking. I'm not going to get this. No, I'm not going to. Only teachers, only swamis, only the great sages. No, these are all modes. One day, or one time, or right now, when that idea, that self-talk, which are all vritti-vyaptis, by the way, since beginningless time, when they are all removed, that Atma is some object, that is akanda karavritti, moksha. In other words, you have removed that notion which you thought you were something out there. There is a way to demonstrate this through, it's called Shaka Chandra Nyaya. Shaka is a branch, and there was a very interesting example where there was a student and a guru, and the student couldn't see the moon because Chandra means moon, and Shaka is a branch. So the student was going, where is the moon, Guru? I don't see the moon, because it was I don't think it was a moon, but like a star, something very small. And it was sort of, nighttime, but it was not apparent for some reason. The moon was not apparent to the student. And there was enough light to see the tree, right? And so the student's like, where is this moon? I don't see it. There, it's over there. You see? I don't see it. And what did the guru say? Well, look at what do you see right now? Well, I see the big bark of the tree. Can you see that, student? Yes, I see the big bark of it. Great. Let's move up. Do you see the big branch on the tree? A little bit harder now. Which one? That one or that one? No, that one on the left. I see that branch. Great. Now let's move up. Go to the topmost branch sticking out of this branch and just follow that branch to the end. Okay, now go to, you see that little bird? Wait, which one? It's so dense. I found it. Good. Now see above the bird, there's a fruit. Yep, got the fruit. Yep, that one or that one? No, not the one on the left, the one above that. Got it. Okay, good. Now you see the branch that's sticking out, like looks like a V above that? Yep, I see it. Good. Now go right above, in the center of that V, and to the end of that last branch sticking out. Yep, got it. Now just move slightly to the left and you see a little light shining? Yes, I see it. Now, what does the branch, what does the fruit, what does the bird, what do the leaves have anything to do with the moon? Nothing and yet everything at the same time. It was used to a means to the end. In other words, all until now, everything was a means to an end. Vritti vyapti, more images, more self-help, more personal development, more philosophy, more academic studies, more this, more that, more research. It was all creating just images, intellectualizing. It's all just images until you realize, wow, all of that was not the final end. It was just a means to help me see the final truth. And therefore, Shaka Chandranyaya, it's like this. Everything was an image to help you, except finally, the knowledge takes place. Now, what about love? Love sounds like Akandakara Vritti. It's kind of like an abstract thing, isn't it? It's very, like, what is love? Love, isn't love Akandakara Vritti? A thought without division? A mental mode without division? I can't put love into any kind of a concrete thing, like a pen or hatred or disgust. These are very gross things. Everyone knows disgust, everyone knows displeasure, but what about love? It's so subtle. Isn't that self? Isn't that the reality? The Western world loves the word love. They even call the self the love. No. Total confusion. Self is not love. If self was love, then self could not illumine hate. Because love has gradations. There is, for example, love for child versus love for hobby. It is love, but it has gradations between the types. And there is intensity of love. One day I have a lot of love for rapping, another day a little bit less love for rapping or whatever, playing music or, whatever you love to do. Okay? Anything that has a gradation or opposite to it is not Akandakara Vritti. It is still mithya. It still depends on the presence of awareness to light it up, to light up its presence. Therefore, now let's reconcile this. Look at this. Having heard this, you cannot use the mind to know Brahman. Which one? You cannot use the mind to know Brahman. Vritti vyapti. You cannot use the mind, brackets, vritti vyapti, to know Brahman. And yet, you can use the mind, brackets, palavyapti, to know Brahman. You understand? In other words, you cannot use the mind to turn awareness into an image. Therefore, vritti vyapti. But you can use the mind to know Brahman because the mind has ignorance of Brahman, and that ignorance is cancelled out through knowledge of Brahman. In other words, knowledge removes my ignorance of myself, that one who is ever true, ever present, and unaffected. Viditat, aviditat, adhi. So Atma is neither known as a particular object, as we just discussed, nor can you say Atma can't be known. Atma is not a particular object, nor can you say, I don't know Atma. What does this mean?
The self is existent, but not experienceable as an object.
Good. It's existent, and yet it's not experienceable as a particular object. In fact, just to say, I don't know Atma, I don't know me, I don't know I, that whole speech is blessed by Atma. Who's revealing that statement? Atma is revealing that statement. That's why you can't say Atma can't be known. Because just to know that you said Atma can't be known, just to know that implies Atma is revealing that statement. And at the same time, Atma can't be known as an object because, again, Atma is attributeless, and therefore you can't know it as something that is outside of you because it is you. Atma is always available as I am, and it is never conditioned by any attribute. Now, it wants to, the following verses, they want to reinforce everything we said so far in very compressed modes. So verse 1.4 and verse 1.5, I'm going to combine. So I'm just going to chant verse 1.4. Actually, let's just read verse 1.3. Someone please read 1.3.
Eyes have no access there. The organ of speech also does not reach there, nor does the mind. We do not recognize it as an object. We do not therefore know how to impart this knowledge in any other way. It is indeed different from the known and also from the unknown. Thus we have heard from our predecessors who expounded it on to us.
Okay. Now, verse 1.4, Yat Vach anabhyuditam yena vak abhyudyate tad eva brahma tvam vidhi nedam yat idam upasate. Okay. So, it says here, Brahman is that which cannot be explained by words. In other words, it cannot be explained through speech, nor as a any kind of a mode of revealing it through a mantra or a word or anything. Okay? Why? Because in your presence, in the presence of Atma, there is always a speech being revealed. So if you say, I don't know Atma, what is revealing that statement? Atma. If you say, I know Atma, what is revealing that statement? Same Atma. The verse wants to point out that that which is most immediate to you, right, the nearest to you, that is Atma. Therefore, there is no question of waiting to hear about it, just to wait. What is lighting up your waiting to hear about Atma? Atma. Okay, I want to hear about Atma. Come on, I want to hear about Atma. Give me the truth. Give me the truth. What's lighting up that statement? The very thing you're seeking, the very thing you want. Then verse 1.6, it's the same idea. It says, Atma, the truth, is not something that you can see, but because of which seeing happens. Is seeing happening right now? Why is seeing happening? Because Atma is illumining everything that is in your mind. And what is in your mind? This room. This is mind. And what's lighting up this room now? And then verse 1.7, Brahman, so I'm going to change the word now, Atma, Brahman. Brahman is not something that you can hear by sound, but it is that because of which sounds are revealed. Now, look at this. Who's revealing sounds? Who's revealing sounds like this that happened outside? Who was revealing that? In the presence of whom was that revealed? In the presence of me. Therefore, it says here, Brahman is not something that you can hear by sound, but that which reveals sounds. Sounds were just revealed to us, even now they're being revealed by this speech. Therefore, is Brahman away from you? No. Otherwise, if Brahman was away, then who would be revealing these sounds right now? Therefore, it shows you that just the fact that sounds are revealed, Brahman cannot be away from you. And Brahman is the final reality. That is what everyone's looking for. Brahman, consciousness, awareness, the final reality. If you didn't enjoy the final reality right now, you would not be hearing these sounds. And even if you were deaf, you say, what about then? It doesn't matter. You can still hear sounds in your mind. You can still see. Na idam ya upasate. That means consciousness, or Brahman, is not what people worship. In other words, consciousness is not something that you can worship, such as an idea, such as the Om sign, such as notion or an experience or a memory, a non-dual experience once upon a time. I'm going to worship that as Brahman. Sometimes that happens. Someone has a meditation, a deep meditation, and they enter a very beautiful state, and they worship that and say, no, I have gotten in touch with Brahman. I remember that time. It was Samadhi. That was the pure Brahman right there. No. Okay? It is not something that you can worship or something that is remembered as an experience. It is in whose presence remembering is happening right now. In whose presence worshiping is happening right now. Oh, look, I'm worshiping Brahman. What is revealing this body right now worshiping Brahman? Brahman. Okay? The only thing is, the moment we say Brahman is not something that you can worship as an object, the mind is so genius, it finds something else to worship as Brahman. No, it's okay, I'll just go to Amazon and do some liquids over there and, I'll go... Yeah, I'll find it. Don't worry. That's the nature of the mind. It always wants to grasp the reality as some object, as some subtle sound. In fact, we start out the spiritual journey by grasping the reality as very gross objects, very dense objects, such as like loud noise, like special sound healing and mantras, very, very concrete objects. And then you go more silent. No, you just need to go thoughtless. It's hiding in your thoughtlessness. You have to make your mind so silent, it's always there. It sounds like a conch. It smells like, what do they say? Rosemary or something. The truth smells, when you get in touch with it, it's going to have a very distinct smell. Like rosemary or basil, or it's going to sound like the waves in the ocean. When you hear that, you have touched Brahman. You have touched the reality. I've read these things before, because, huh?
When you see the blue light.
Yeah. When you're in the yoga, right? And I was in yoga for many years. You just read about this all over the place. So it's kind of like lucky that I did read, so I'm informed what kind of notions. And you're so convinced that is what you're looking for that nobody can tell you otherwise. No one can convince you out of it. This is the great irony. Even if they have best intentions for you, you're like, you don't understand. I found it. I'm there almost. So you just have to wait it out a little bit. You just have to wait out for the mind to drop these ideas. That's just how it is. Okay. And then verse 1.8. Okay, so again it says consciousness. Okay, so prana. So Brahman is not sustained by prana, but by which the prana is sustained. Okay, so here what happens is consciousness can be very easily mixed up with sentiency. When it says the word prana here, it just means sentiency, like aliveness. The system is breathing, it's functioning. And what it wants to say by sentiency or prana is the jiva that moves, the jiva that takes different bodies. So that's what's sentient. That's the sentient. So when you use the word sentient, it specifically refers to jiva. What is a jiva? Jiva is one who has a physical body and also a mind. But also a jiva can be without a physical body. That's called physical death. But then that mind continues to different bodies. Okay? And it's reprogrammed. That's why you don't remember what happened, because it's reprogrammed from scratch. But you take away some impressions into the next life. So that one who, quote, travels, not that they travel, where is there to travel, but right, travels to a different body, takes on a new body, is called jiva. So that jiva here is taken as sentiency or prana. So it says here consciousness can be easily mixed up with sentiency. Now, the moment you think this, there's a subsequent error, because that means consciousness is only present in sentient beings, those with prana, those with physiological functions, those with a mind. Now, what's going to happen then? That means consciousness is now isolated to individual beings. That means this is not consciousness. Insentient rocks are not consciousness. Hydrogen, air, fire, water, earth, that is not consciousness. Only a sentient being is consciousness. If you start to think like this, then you are forced to make a subsequent error and say consciousness is bound to space and time. And therefore, consciousness is not in rocks. Now, the question is, how do you demonstrate that consciousness is also in rocks, in sentient matter? How do we demonstrate that using what we've learned so far?
To break it down to atoms.
Good. Say again a little bit more.
To break it down to quarks, to the most little
Mhm.
part, you know.
Okay. And you keep
Concepts, and then intelligence, and then you end up with consciousness.
good. So how do you show that a rock is consciousness? Because if you break down that rock, you will see it too is put together. There is, for example, 5 carbon, 6 hydrogen, and 5 oxygen atoms to form silica, right? So there's an intelligent putting together. And that intelligent putting together is also reducible. Those atoms are reducible into concepts, as we've discussed. And concept can never be outside a conscious being. In other words, you cannot think of intelligence outside of consciousness. Consciousness supplies intelligence with the ability to put together. Just like your mind cannot do anything without you being conscious. If you're just in a coma, your mind, no matter how intelligent it is, it cannot put things together. So the question I asked was, how do you show that consciousness is inside rocks? What was the answer? You break it down into parts, it reduces to concepts, and concepts have a satya mithya relationship to awareness. So they resolve finally into awareness. Okay, now let's ask this question. What makes an object sentient? What's the difference between a sentient object, like a human being or a dog, and a rock? Subtle body. Now, what is a subtle body? Well, in Sanskrit, it's more accurate. It's sukshma sharira. Sharira means that which changes, that which decays. To decay is to change. That subtle body is being equated to the word prana in this verse. So, because subtle body makes you sentient, okay? So now the question is, how do you show that the subtle body is different from the physical body? Because there are many neurologists who will say that there is no mind. The mind is your physical brain. Okay? Many of them say this. But in Vedanta, what we say is that your physical brain is one type of matter and your mind is another type of matter. So how do you demonstrate that your subtle body, that is your mind, which is equated to the word prana in this verse, how do you show that your mind is different from your physical brain?
Because you're the only one who can see it and feel it and know it, and nobody else. The physical body, everybody else can see, but the mind, the psychic body, only you are aware of.
Okay. Emotions, okay, that's possible. It could be, though, put with chemicals too. Okay, any other ideas? How do you demonstrate that your mind, your thoughts, is different from physical matter, physical gray matter?
I thought that there were experiments where they took great parts of the brain away, but the patterns, the beliefs stayed. Also, after removing the brain as matter, the subtle body remained.
Okay, of course. So there is one, good. So there is one experiment, not experiment, but there was one case where half of a brain was taken out because someone had epilepsy or seizures, and they had to take out a whole brain. And the person still had a sense of eyes. They still had a sense of, who I am and what I like, what I desire, and where I come from, and it still had culture.
Your thoughts, you cannot measure thoughts with you need a projection, so it sends information. Or instruments you can, so you cannot
Measure.
witness it actually.
Good. So, okay, I'll go with this. So that was a very good argument. So what he's saying is that if I say imagine like a green tree, right, in your mind, just imagine a tree. And if I say, now keep on imagining, and then I kind of hook up instruments to your brain, and I try to look, the only thing I can see is physical electrical impulses, right, movements, gray matter. But if I break down your brain, suppose I could, and I try to go inside atoms, and I see where is a green tree, which atom has green. If one atom doesn't have a green tree, then which other atom is going to have a green tree? Because a tree is not intrinsic to an atom. So no matter what atom you look up, you're not going to find a green tree. Okay? So in other words, I can see your physical activity, but I cannot see your subjective experience. The second way is that during a brain operation, when patients have their brains open, and they have to be awake, because the way it works is that if you operate on the brain, the patient has to let you know if they can still speak so that they don't take too much brain out during cancer. Now, the way they do that, to test the patient's motor functions, is they put 2 electrodes on their physical brain, and they will see, right, which limb will move. Now, if the brain and mind were one and the same thing, then by the time you activate the brain and your arm moves, you would say, I used my free will to move that arm. But you don't say that. You experience your arm without your free will moving. In other words, the brain is one thing and mind is something else. Because were the brain and mind one thing, then if I control your brain, you would say, yeah, I thought of that and therefore I did it. But you don't say that. You go, wow, can you do that again? Right? Another way is that your body can be right here, your eyes can be open, but there is no indweller. Knock, knock. Oh, sorry, I'm back. In other words, your senses were open. All of the sense data was being received inside the brain, but the brain was temporarily disconnected from the indweller, the mind, and therefore no indweller registered what was going on. So this means your body, your physical brain can be here, but you could be having an entirely different experience with your mind flying away somewhere.
Is it the same when people are reborn again and they have memories of their past life? That you have a new brain, you have a new body, but still they can prove in my life before, I used to live there, and those are there's evidence that they have that memory. It's all true.
Yeah, that's another way. It will be subject to kind of, is this a real thought? Was this something that really happened in the past life? So you kind of have to accept that there is a continuity of life. But it's a good argument. However, it would require that there is indeed a continuity of life on the part of the listener. So yes, it's definitely a provable way because you get a brand new brain and yet you've got these memories that are of some other person. That means something different, right, carried over. Cannot be the physical brain though. So good, that's a good argument. Now the next question comes is, how do you show, because some people's identity, I tell you, is in their minds. They say, I am the mind. So how do you show that the subtle body, that is the mind, is not bound to awareness? How do you show there are two different things? There are two different orders of reality.
Deep sleep where there's no mind and still the people are there, come back, look again with their subtle body.
So in other words, what you're saying is that during deep sleep, when there is no life, therefore there's no mind to report anything. But as we said earlier, if I were to be the mind, then I wouldn't go to sleep because the mind goes out of existence and I don't want to go out of existence. So we would be afraid to go to deep sleep. Second, but we're not, right? We go to deep sleep gladly. Secondly is that deep sleep is known to the subject. That means the subject wakes up, and upon waking up, you ask them, how was your sleep? Did you sleep? Yeah, I slept. Now, when you say I slept, did you mean I dreamt? You specifically mean I slept. I enjoyed that moment which did not include the dream. I enjoyed that moment which did not include that moment where the mind was still there. That's called a dream. In other words, I loved my sleep. I loved the moment where there was no mind. When you say, oh, I want to go to sleep tonight, I can hardly wait to go to sleep tonight and get a good rest. What did you mean in that statement? Did you mean I can hardly wait to dream? I can hardly wait for my mind to be there? No. You meant I can hardly wait for that other moment where there is absence of whatever is moving, whatever is changing. Another way is your subtle body is consisting of memories of your calculations, conclusions, opinions, ideas about reality, about yourself right now. All of these are ideas coming and going, coming and going, coming and going. And these ideas, which are coming and going, are changing over 60,000 times per day. And they can only change in reference to a non-changing substratum. Nirvikalpa Samadhi, we said. Whole life is gone. And yet, I am not gone. Mind is gone. I am not gone. Your subtle body is an object of consciousness to me, and my subtle body is an object of consciousness to you. Look at this. When you speak, I can't see your subtle body. I can only see your physical body now. Even under a microscope, if I look at your brain, I can't see your subtle body, but I can see your subtle body. How? I can see the effect of your subtle body. I can't see the cause, but I can see the effect when you speak. You open your mouth and speak. All of that are effects of the subtle body, effects of your mind. And these effects, these words, are all objects of consciousness to you. And when you reply to me, you're replying from your subtle body, and they're all objects of consciousness to me. Therefore, my subtle body is object of consciousness, your subtle body is object of consciousness. An object of consciousness is different from consciousness. Okay? So tomorrow we will introduce a very important idea and introduce Maya, and we will introduce the idea, how do you reduce forms and attributes into a formless reality? How does that make sense? Purnamadav Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnam Eva Avashishyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti.